Call this meeting of the City of West Hollywood Rent Stabilization Commission meeting to order this Thursday, July 11th, 2019. Commissioner Kerpes, you'd like to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Madam Secretary, can we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner O'Keefe. Present. Commissioner Kerpes.
Here.
Commissioner Maggio.
Here.
Commissioner Martz.
Present.
Commissioner Topchian. Vice Chair Bergstein.
Present.
Chair Charity.
Okay, we have a quorum. Item 5, approval of the minutes. I have one change, and I'm sorry, Madam Secretary, I didn't have a chance to call you on this. On page 5 of our packet, under staff comments, I made a comment asking about, you've got it marked as safe housing report. This was about saving existing affordable housing, so save affordable existing housing.
And I had one, are we talking about the minutes, or are we doing an agenda?
Did I skip? I did. Item 4 instead of item 5. You haven't had a chance to look at tonight's agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda, July 11th, 2019.
I will second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Okay. Now item 5. Sorry about that. Approval of minutes. Commissioner Kerpes?
Yeah, I just had one minor change on page 1 of our minutes. Down at the very bottom, regarding the motion to discuss annual security interest rate. It currently says future agenda before it goes to council. Just to clarify, it's with enough time so that if the council or if the commission takes action, there's time for it to go to council before the new 2020 interest rate would go into effect.
Any other amendments or changes or corrections? Do we have a motion to approve as amended?
Second.
I'll make the motion with the approval of the amendment.
Your motion? Yes? Commissioner?
Commissioner Maggio
Maggio,
just made
you-
the motion.
I did, yes.
I'll
Is there a
second.
second?
Thank you.
Is there a second?
Yes, I second it.
All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? None. Item 5 to item 6. I don't have any public comment slips up here. Are there any public speakers? Thank you. Item 7, Directors and Managers Report. Manager Newton.
Good evening. A review of the look-ahead calendar will show that your next meeting, July 25th, has been canceled for lack of quorum. The next meeting, when the commission will sit, is August 8th. There is 2 appeals scheduled for that evening. You will also have the opportunity to consider electing a member to serve on a panel to look at strategies for the 2020 census that evening. Your study session is scheduled for August 22nd, and then August 12th, we do have 1 appeal scheduled, and there's also an RSO code amendment. This is regarding alternative maintenance standards for historically designated properties as a way of addressing unique particularities in the paint or other maintenance that might be impacted by our standard maintenance processes. Also in your packet, I want to point out that tomorrow the city, in collaboration with the chamber, is hosting a free seminar. This is for property owners that are subject to the mandatory seismic retrofitting program. That is now in effect. Notices have gone out, and so we're hosting a seminar providing information on that, on the seismic requirements. It is a 5-year requirement to retrofit any soft story buildings, and there will be information on financing, on the city's progress in obtaining grants and support, and then we'll have information on the tenant habitability plan requirements that the commission forwarded to the council and the council adopted last year. That concludes my report.
Just to correct, you said that's tomorrow. I believe it's on Saturday.
It is on, I apologize, it is on Saturday, July 13th. I had Friday on my mind.
And will there be any online access or hard copy access for any landlords who are not able to attend to obtain any of the information that's being presented?
There isn't any information directly about the seminar. However, the city has a website, www.weho.org/seismic, and that has all of the information on the program there. So the session is on Saturday, July 13th. It is at Plummer Park in Fiesta Hall, and it runs from 11 a.m. until 2 p.m.
So will that information on the website be updated as we get more information on potential funding sources and grants?
It will, and it's going to be a little while before we have word that we have any grant dollars awarded, but that will be available on that website. It's again www.weho.org/seismic.
Thank you. Commissioners, any questions for staff?
Just a question. So am I to understand correctly that the initial survey that the city did a year or two ago of the properties around the city that did a visual study, and those letters have gone out to those properties?
There's a sequence of noticing that is taking effect. The council did adopt a sequence, and the first sequence has gone out. I don't have information on which properties had been notified. I believe that it's the higher occupancy properties, though, that were notified first. And then there's 2 other waves of notices that will follow.
Commissioner O'Keefe?
I know some residents of the city had been wondering, initially when there was the survey done, it was in the front of each building, and some people raised that the back of some buildings may have soft stories where the front did not. Was there ever a follow-up survey, or is anything, or will anything be done, if not, to include those buildings as well?
Yeah, I think it's important to note that we are not calling this a survey because it wasn't technically a survey. It was just, I'm not remembering the exact word, but essentially we drove down, or the consultant drove down the streets and identified buildings that they thought would be subject. So buildings that are not on that list, they are still subject to the requirements. I'm not certain how we're going to be going forward with compliance on those properties, but I'm sure that the building official has something that he's working out.
So in some way, landlords will all be told that this applies if you have a little beam, whether or not you're on this list, right?
Right. Yeah, the requirement applies to any soft story structures. It doesn't specify that you're on the list, and if you're not, it doesn't apply to you. It is all soft story structures in the city.
Thank you.
Further questions for staff? Move to item 8, commission comments.
I think I'll bring this up now, and it might be for staff. It is for staff, but there have been individuals in my building who are affordable housing, and I've had several calls, actually, that they have not been, they don't know if they've been recertified as they usually do every year, where they have to present financial statements and things of that nature. Do you know anything about that?
It's unrelated to the Rent Stabilization Commission. It's a general comment. I can tell you that it is the landlord's responsibility to do that, and the tenants should rest assured that they're not in any kind of trouble, and that staff can follow up with the building owner.
All right, so I would direct them to the desk or staff if they had the questions that help them to feel
Better
more.
appropriate to just direct them to the building owner, the leasing agent at the building.
All right, thank you.
Comments? I have one quick question. Mr. Noonan, as I said at the last meeting, I was able to easily set up my online portal as a landlord for the city of West Hollywood. I was able to re-register my first vacancy. But the only issue that came up is I think some of the millennials don't really use email any longer. And so I got a notice from the city after 2 weeks saying your tenant has not responded, your re-registration will be deemed accepted. So I called her and said, hey, please check your email. If this becomes a recurring problem with other people who may be communicating via social media or texting rather than emails, could we look at perhaps adding an option for tenant notification for those forms via text? Just file that away for future if it becomes an issue.
We can look at that. I'd also encourage when you're doing the registration to remind your tenants that there is an email that will be coming out for their signature. I'm not sure that we can do an electronic signature through text, but I'll put it on the list to look at. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Move on to item 9, our appeals, and we have 2 appeals this evening. The first one is for D4417, 1246 Hayward Avenue, apartment number 103. The appeal was filed by Patrick, I always butcher names, Roldan. Mr. Roldan, or your representative, are you present? Yes. Didn't see, thank you. And tenant is Travis Guterman. Mr. Guterman, you present? Okay. Just so procedural, the way this works is you both get 5 minutes to speak to the commission. We can't hear any new evidence, so if it is not in the record, one of us will stop you short. We are an appellate body. We can't bring new things into the record. Since the appeal was followed by the property owner, you may split your time however you wish. You may speak at the beginning, reserving some of your time for rebuttal after the tenant has spoken. You use the entire thing up all at once. Just let us know when you come forward. We'll have a staff report first, and then we will, the commission will have the opportunity to ask staff questions. Then we will hear from both of you. We may have questions or may not, and then we will go into deliberations. Ms. Regan?
Thank you. The property owner has appealed the hearing examiner's decision to grant a $29 rent reduction for the failure to provide a resident manager. The city's rent stabilization ordinance requires a resident manager on the premises of every parcel with 16 or more units. There is no dispute that there are 18 units on this property. There's also no dispute that the owner does not reside on the premises. Instead, she lives across the street. In his appeal, the property owner claims that a full-time manager, Zahana Polyachenko, was available and shared managerial duties with the manager across the street. At the same time, however, he also says that he has now made Ms. Polyachenko the manager in apartment 107, and Ms. Kostyuk is her supervisor. Staff recommends that the commission affirm the hearing examiner's decision. There is substantial evidence in the record that Ms. Kostyuk, who lived off-site, was the building manager at the time of the hearing, while Ms. Polyachenko served as an assistant manager whose duties were to pick up trash and help when Ms. Kostyuk was unavailable. Thank you.
Commissioners, do you have any questions for Ms. Regan? 1 second. The record can reflect that Commissioner Topchin has joined us. On your first appeal, D4417. So, Mr. Roldan, if you want to come up to the podium, please state your name, your city of record, speak clearly in the microphone. Please let me know how long you'd like to divide up your time. You have a total of 5 minutes.
Okay. My name is Patrick Roldan, and I'm the operations supervisor for Stanley Surratt, who owns 1246 Hayward.
In your city of residence?
No.
Your city of where do you reside, sir? What city?
I live in Rancho Cucamonga.
Thank you. And then how do you want to divide your time?
I will speak for about 3 minutes, and then I'll leave the final 2 for rebuttal.
Okay.
Okay?
Go ahead.
Okay. First of all, after reading the decision, after the hearing, I believe that the mediator did not understand that Ms. Pochenko, who is my assistant manager that lives on site, is always available 24/7 to the tenants, and that she had posted hours along with my manager who lived across the street of 9 to 4 on a daily basis, Monday through Friday. The reason I put Mrs. Pochenko was our assistant manager was because when we purchased the complex, we had no vacants. I had no place to put an existing manager. So that's why we had previously owned the building across the street, and that manager ran that complex. And then when I realized we didn't have a vacant coming up, that's when we made Ms. Pochenko our assistant manager, who had the same duties as my manager across the street. It was a co-managing, if you want to call it. And like as I said, from reading the decision, I think she misunderstood that the assistant manager is the manager on site with the same business hours as my other manager across the street. And then once I heard the decision, that's why I made Ms. Pachenko my resident manager, because I felt that, I guess, assistant manager didn't mean as much as a manager, even though they did the same thing. So I made Alicia my supervisor, who oversaw Ms. Pachenko. So, technically now, yes, I have a resident manager on site with the business hours posted of 9 to 4, Monday through Friday, and they both co-manage the property. I think that's good for now.
You know, Commissioners, do you have any questions? Yes.
Sir, you do understand that the requirement under the RSO is that the resident manager must be on site, residing on the premises, and there are two factors, and one is residing on the premises, another one maintaining a regular business hours during which he or she is physically present on the premises. So per your own acknowledgement, you didn't have a vacancy at the time. That's why the lady who was serving as assistant manager was not on-site manager. So that's your own
The assistant manager
acknowledgement.
was on site.
Residing on the premises.
Yes, the assistant, Ms. Pochenko resides on the property 24/7. She's lived there for 25 years.
Since when?
Since what?
You said 25 years?
Yes, she's lived in the property for 25 years, Ms. Pochenko.
And she maintained the regular business hours?
Yes, they were posted in the common area where the mailboxes are, along with Alyssa, who resided across the street.
And what was the unit number? What's the unit number that she resides now or resided before?
It's 107? 107, sorry.
107. All right, thank you.
I have a few questions. In the hearing examiner's decision on page 3, it's our page 30, it says that you testified that the assistant manager in 107, her duties are to be available if the manager is not, to walk the property and to pick up trash. Are you saying that that is not what you testified to?
Well, what I'm saying is there was more involved in what she does. I've never been to a hearing.
Sure.
So I tried to explain what her duties are. We purchased many buildings that had management companies, and you see off-site management companies. Managers on site don't do much other than pick up trash, and they handle all the paperwork and all the business items. Ms. Pochenko assisted in actually helping with showing apartments when they were vacant, when they were, excuse me.
Okay, and what I go back though to is the hearing examiner in her decision wrote down that you testified that the assistant manager is to be available if the head manager is not. And that's conflicting with what you're telling us today. So I'm trying to figure out why there's such a disconnect between the hearing examiner's decision and then what we're hearing today.
Maybe I worded that incorrectly. She was available to do whatever Alyssa needed her to do. If she couldn't show an apartment, she would have him do that. All phone calls that ever went to the assistant manager or to Alyssa, the off-site manager, were always taken care of. They funneled the phone calls for maintenance requests, stuff. So they did a lot more than what I talked about.
Okay, and then in regards to the office hours that you said were posted, did you provide any photos or any evidence that those were posted on
The first
on-site?
ones, no, but I do have, after I made the change of supervisor and manager.
Okay. That is all the questions I have. Thank you.
Other questions? Thank you.
Probably a follow-up question. When the tenant moved into the unit, at the time when the tenant moved into the unit, Was the tenant informed about the management person who the tenant should contact, and who was that person at the time?
Yes, yes.
Who was the person at the time as a manager or assistant manager?
You mean when we rented a unit and
Yeah.
showed it to the tenant?
Yes.
That would have been Alyssa, the supervisor now. She handles all the paperwork.
So she resided on the premises?
No,
at the
she resides across the street.
Okay, so she was residing across the street. So nobody was there at the time when the tenant rented the unit? I'm just curious at this point.
Well, Alyssa was present whenever
Okay.
somebody was rented. I
What-
can't tell you, because I'm not there 24/7, whether Ms. Pachenko was involved with the showing of the unit and the paperwork involved.
No, I wonder if there was on-site manager at the time when the tenant moved in, when the unit was rented. It was someone residing full-time as a manager.
Yes.
But, and another thing is, what type of contact information you provided to the tenant?
The phone numbers for Ms. Pachenko and for Alyssa, the phone number for her and where she resides across the street, along with Ms. Pachenko's apartment number that she resides at the 1246.
And the information is posted?
Yeah, I believe so. And along with a letter that was sent out to the tenants.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner O'Keefe?
So we have in the record a letter that was sent to the tenants, and it says, it's on page 23 of our packet. It says, "The managers of your building will be Constantine and Alessa," might be mispronouncing their name, but the ones who live across the street, and it has their unit number, the address, and the phone number. It does not make any mention of Ms. Pachenko, and it says on page 31, the hearing examiner wrote that she found there was no evidence on the record that Ms. Pachenko maintains regular business hours or that she is physically present on site. Did you, in the record, as far as we can see, there is no written notice with Ms. Pachenko's phone number or address or evidence of posted hours? Was there something that we're missing that was submitted?
At that time of that letter was when the building was purchased. At that time, we were hoping we were going to have a vacant so I could transfer Alyssa over to that complex. It's apartments. You usually get a vacant now and then. None ever appeared. So that's when I asked Alyssa who in our complex there could be the manager, assistant manager to her and help her run the building. And that's when she came up with Ms. Pachenko. And then her name and on all the business hours were posted above the mailbox, along with Alyssa's.
Thank you.
Commissioners, any further questions at this time? You can have a seat, sir. Mr. Guterman? Mr. Guterman, you have a total of 5 minutes to speak.
Thank you very much. I'd like to split my time.
You're not allowed to split, just 5 minutes period.
Oh, 5 minutes period. Okay. So I would like to add some clarity to the timeline of when Zana was supposedly added as assistant manager. I became a tenant of the building August 2017. At the time, it was owned by a different owner. There was a resident manager. He lived in Unit 101. When my building was purchased, I think in April of 2018, that manager was fired. Subsequently, he was removed from the building, and I have a new manager who was, I was told, lived across the street. Zana became manager after I sent the original 30-day notice to the landlord requesting that there be a resident manager and that there be postings, which I found on the website for City West Hollywood that dictated that the requirements of the building to have a resident manager as well as post the business hours. Now, I believe Zana's appointment was more form over substance. She does not do any of the managerial tasks. None of my neighbors in the original hearing, when I asked for testimonies and they emailed it in, I provide those as records, had any formal contact with Zana. All of our contact has always been with Alessia. And still to this day, Zana is not the actual manager. All of my contact when there are things that go wrong is through Alessia. I called several times during business hours when I had workers in my unit to find out the situation. I called Zana's number after because I saw it posted. She was not on site. This is during business hours. Her husband answered the phone and directed me to Alessia, who was across the street and available to come. I see the rest of my time. If you have questions, happy to answer them.
Commissioners, questions?
What, sir, what did you need to ask the resident manager? You said she wasn't doing her tasks.
Yes.
And
So
you said you had construction, so why did you have to call her?
okay. So when I was waiting there for the workers, they were over an hour late, and I'm just sitting there waiting. This is during my business day, so I took off time for work. So I was trying to call to find out what the situation is. Are they actually going to show up? So I called Zana. This was at like 10:30 in the morning approximately, during her business hours, which are 9 to 4. And her husband answered the phone and said she was out running errands at the store, but Alessia is available across the street. So I contacted Alessia, and Alessia had the information on the status of the painters.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question.
Please.
Where did you obtain Ms. Polichenko's phone number? You said you saw it posted somewhere?
Yes, so after I sent 30-day notice to post the business hours and the contract, which was back in September, even though I didn't have my hearing, I didn't actually go and enforce it with the city until January of 2019, but I originally sent the notice in September. So about, I think, November, they actually finalized and they put up the signs up there, and that's where her number was found. It stayed up there until I needed it.
So if I understand what you just said, so in September is when you wrote the letter for saying that nothing's posted.
Yes.
Sometime in November, you think that's when they may have posted a sign?
Correct.
With Ms. Polichenko's number and hours of operation 9 to 4 or something?
Oh, well, okay, on that notice, it actually, on the notice, what they posted, it was still Alessia as the manager, and then it says below assistant manager Zana. And I think I might have put a copy in the record for the hearing of what that sign looked like. It was prominently displaying Alessia's thing, and then very small on the bottom you have Zana's information as assistant manager. Like I said, I think it's more form over substance. The actual manager is Alessia.
Okay, thank you.
If I, just a quick question. The rent payments, did you ever make direct rent payments to them, Zana or Alessia?
Yes, so I make rent payments, and I make them into a box. From the hearing, it was established that Alessia is the one who collects the rent. And then since the hearing, I actually, when I had some painters also, they were fixing at a remediation issue. I was out of my unit for a week, so I technically was late on one of my rent payments. And the letter, the 3-day notice or whatever it was to quit, pay or quit, was signed by Alessia.
Alessia. Okay, thank you.
Just want to clarify. So I don't know if you can see that. Can you see this sign okay?
Yes.
Is this what you had submitted to, for the hearing?
Yes,
Okay. And this is the sign that was posted in sometime in November?
correct.
All right, thank you.
Questions? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Roldan, you have 2 minutes left.
The first notice was placed before November. It was sometime late September. And that's pretty much when we decided that Ms. Polchenko was going to be the assistant manager. Because the major decisions have to be made by the supervisor. That's why Ms. Polchenko would then refer it to Alyssa to make the final decisions on the major items that had to be taken care of. You know, the first manager, he didn't leave immediately. He's paid rent. He stayed, I forget for how many months afterwards. And he was let go because he was never around. I visited the building prior to purchasing it 4 times, and he was never there. So, you know, this whole thing is, the whole item has come because of Ms. Guterman's issues with his apartment and a leak. It's the only reason he's brought this up. But I have made Ms. Pochenko our manager. She was the assistant manager. I lived on site. She was available from 9 to 4 every day, Monday through Friday. All issues regarding the tenants were taken care of immediately by both of them. Currently, we have, didn't put this in, but this is our new business hours notice that we posted after I received the decision from the hearing. So it's been up for whatever, I think it is like 3 or 4 months. So, which it has as listed their names and phone numbers. So, okay.
Commissioners, questions? Shamajo?
About the leak, which you have mentioned, how soon did you know about that leak? The leak.
The
you
leak?
took, yeah.
We were notified immediately that there was water dripping from a ceiling.
And who did they notify?
At that time, they contacted Alyssa. Alyssa immediately called the tenant above, asked her not to run any water, and then shortly after that, Alyssa's husband went and found what the issue was, shut the water off.
And Alyssa was just across the street, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And see, at that time, I didn't have Ms. Pochenko as our assistant yet, because that was early, or summertime of our, I don't recall the date.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Go into commission deliberations. Commissioner Topchin, would you like to start?
Yes, Presiding Chair. Well, I've read this over and over again, and I reviewed the evidence, obviously, before me, and I was kind of torn in between. But today's testimony, I didn't really hear anything that would have convinced me that the examiner's decision was incorrect, was in error based on the evidence that was presented to her or him. So I'm convinced now that the findings are correct and the examiner's decision is proper based on the information and the evidence presented to her. I'm going to support staff's recommendation in this matter. Thank you.
I think there's substantial evidence on the record to support the hearing examiner's decision. The hearing examiner found that there was no evidence in the record that Ms. Palachenko maintains regular business hours or that she is physically present on site during those hours and available to meet the tenant's concerns. If that is now changed, that is irrelevant to the question of whether or not we would sustain the decision because it's based on the facts at the date of the hearing examiner's decision. There would have to be a compliance measure after a decision if it had changed after the fact. It doesn't look like Ms. Palachenko herself testified at the hearing examiner at the hearing, but from the testimony the hearing examiner heard, she found that she was not a bona fide resident manager, and thus I would sustain the decision.
Mr. Kerpes?
So I came here this evening after reading the evidence from the hearing, not seeing anything that would lead anyone to believe that there was a manager on site at this location at the time of the hearing. But in tonight's testimony from the tenant, the timeline I'm hearing is that in September, he wrote a letter to notify the landlord that he was out of compliance, that there was no on-site manager. And at sometime in November, there was a posting placed on the premises that lists manager, assistant manager, hours, and phone numbers for both the manager and what we're calling assistant manager. The hearing then took place in February, I believe, of 2019. So I don't know why the tenant's testimony tonight would intentionally go against the facts that were discussed that was shown to the hearing examiner, but even though they're not under oath tonight, I can't dismiss the fact that the tenant just told us that there was posting of a phone number. The only thing that I see missing is the fact that the sign didn't say the unit number of the residence of the manager, which I don't know if that's technically part of the law or not. But all the testimony has been that Ms. Polchenko has resided at the property the entire time. So the only thing that was missing for me this evening coming here was notice to the tenants. And what I learned this evening was in November, tenants were notified of Ms. Polchenko's phone number. It happened to be that when the tenant called, she was not available. I can tell you I work several hours a day, beyond 9 to 5, but if you call my office, you're very unlikely to get me on the first time you call. So I don't necessarily think that, and the testimony was that he spoke to her husband, which would also lead me to believe that it was truly her residence. Her partner, her husband was living there. I don't have any reason to disbelieve that she wasn't. So that's where I'm at. The timeline to me seems like the hearing examiner just wasn't provided the evidence, and it wasn't that it was evidence from the landlord that for some reason he just withheld that. It seems like the evidence wasn't made clear to her that there was a posting. I'm not saying that's anyone's fault. It's just we're hearing that was the fact, that there was a posting. So I don't know if that meets the requirement of the law or not, but that's what I'm struggling with, because there was an on-site person there. It just may have been missing some of the details of the apartment number.
Mr. Maggio?
I am not going to support the hearing examiner. Although the ordinance 175601, H1 and 2, which talks about the resident manager and the residential or regular business hours are very clear. I think in this case, it's overreaching and far too strict. For me to have a manager either next door or across the street is, and under a new ownership, I think they've tried their very best, and I just can't see the argument here. I think it's just goes too far. And I think the owner's been fair and reasonable and equitable, and I cannot support the hearing examiner on this particular case.
Mr. Martz?
I would vote to support the hearing examiner's decision. There's a multitude of reasons to do that. First, our appeals are limited to whether there's substantial evidence to support the hearing examiner's decision. I think there absolutely is. And it says clearly in our summary that if such evidence is found, then the commission will uphold the decision even if other evidence could support a different outcome. So, yes, there is other evidence out there that there was someone living in 107 that could have been the resident manager. That's neither here nor there if we find that the hearing examiner had substantial evidence to make her decision. I think there is quite a bit. The law that we are working under, RSO 1756010H1, in the event that the owner does not reside upon the premises, a manager shall reside upon the premises and shall have charge of every parcel if there are X number of units. And what I'm getting out of that is that we have two managers here, and I just don't see from the testimony that was provided and the documents that were submitted that the assistant manager, the resident manager, whatever we are calling it in Unit 107 had charge of this parcel. I think the tenant is correct in stating that this is form over substance, that we have no evidence that the person in 107 did anything. That person didn't testify. The evidence here is that the manager across the street was the person, and she testified, to collect the rent, make the deposit to the bank, take care of the building, coordinate with vendors, and she was the one that had the business hours that are 8 to 5, which is required by the RSO, and that tenants could call her at any time. The assistant manager in 107 didn't testify. There's nothing in the hearing examiner's decision to show that she had anything beyond picking up trash. Mr. Roldan, who I appreciate that hearings are not fun and sometimes you slip up and forget to say things, but you even said you may not have said things at the hearing that would have supported your position. And it's not our job, and we can't fill in things that are missing from the hearing examiner's hearing. We can't collect new evidence, and I think that may be what's taking place here is new evidence is being submitted by testimony or by documents, and we're limited to what we have in front of us here. So I absolutely think this is an easy one, and I would uphold the hearing examiner's decision.
I will also be voting to uphold the hearing examiner's decision. It's clear to me from the record that as of the date of the initial hearing on February 25th, 2019, there was no resident manager on the property. There may have been some kind of an assistant, but the manager was across the street and not in the building. I agree with staff's comment that this is more of an issue for compliance determination, that from the record, it appears there now is a resident manager on the property. The owner can feel free to go back to staff and say we are now fulfilling our obligations. And if any residents want to object and say that the on-site manager is not doing the duties of that position, they can present that at that time. But everything in the record to me is very clear that at the time of the hearing, which is the only thing that we consider, there was no resident manager on the property. With that, I would entertain a motion.
How long does the owner have time to comply? Is there a 3-month period? How long is the period?
The owner can submit a request for compliance at any time.
And then it would have to come back as it would be rescheduled for us to hear the recomplaint?
No, not necessarily.
Okay. Thank you.
No. Your time has expired. Thank you.
May I speak again?
Yes, Commissioner.
I just wanted to respond to a couple of other things in deliberations that my fellow commissioners have said. First I have a question for staff. I believe this was an exhibit, right? This was submitted in the original. So this is not new evidence. This was submitted, but of course it doesn't prove that the assistant manager was actually available during those times. Her name is much smaller. It doesn't have the address. It was part of the record. A couple of other considerations that I saw is on page 25 of our record, we see what seems to be payment stubs for Ms. Polashenko. She was paid, it looks like, $100 a month only for assisting cleaning. That's one of the things I imagine the hearing examiner considered when finding she wasn't a bona fide resident manager and she was just doing a small amount of low-level tasks. And when the tenant mentioned that he called Ms. Polachenko recently, he said recently, I believe. That was after the hearing. So the fact that she might now be serving as a resident manager and that she was just running to the store does not mean that that was what was happening at the time of the hearing. And of course, that's new evidence anyways and may have not been considered. So anyways, with that, I would make a motion to adopt resolution RSC 19558.
I can see where the count is going, but just to clarify the last comment, so he was referring to October of when he contacted her. I'm sorry, no, yeah, it was October. That's when he noticed that there was no. Or he called her in October after writing the 30-day notice. I'm sorry, in October he wrote the note to the landlord saying there's no one listed. In November, there was, because that's when he called her.
Oh, I thought he was saying it was very recent that the husband was there, so I might have
I
misunderstood.
repeated it a couple of times to him and confirmed it, but, yeah. And it was February that the hearing occurred. Well, we don't know if that was before. Correct. I absolutely understand.
There's a motion on the table.
Second.
Second on the motion?
I would second that.
Moved and seconded. Madam Secretary, can we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Kerpes?
No.
Commissioner O'Keefe?
Aye.
Commissioner Maggio?
No.
Commissioner Martz?
Aye.
Commissioner Topchian?
Aye.
Vice Chair Bergstein?
Aye. Motion passes. If either party has any questions, feel free to approach staff. Like that. Move on to appeal number D-4426, which is for 1000 Curson. The appeal is filed by Ryan Dainswood. Mr. Dainswood, are you present? Mr. Dainswood, you're present? You can wait 1 minute, sir.
Can we have the exhibit back?
And tenant John Gossett. Mr. Gossett, are you present? Okay. The same rules will apply. We'll have a report from our legal counsel. The commission will have the opportunity to ask questions to legal counsel. At that point, Mr. Dainswood, you will have a total of 5 minutes to speak. You need to let us know how you want to divide up your time between initial speaking and rebuttal. And then the commission will have the opportunity to ask you questions at that point. You will then hear from Mr. Gossett. Mr. Gossett, you will have 5 minutes total, no rebuttal time. At the end of the 5 minutes or whenever you're finished before that, we will also have the opportunity to question you. So with that, Ms. Regan.
Thank you. In this case, the hearing examiner granted a rent reduction of $42 due to the elimination of a storage space without a corresponding reduction in rent. The tenant testified that he had been using the storage closet next to his unit exclusively since the beginning of his tenancy in 1991. The current landlord, who purchased the property in the summer of 2018, offered no evidence to refute the tenant's testimony. Staff recommends that the commission affirm the hearing examiner's decision. The unrefuted evidence shows that the previous landlord had provided the tenant with the storage closet and that he had been using it continuously and exclusively until the current owner eliminated it. Thank you.
Commissioners, do you have questions for Ms. Regan? I just have one. The owner is claiming in their appeal that they were not properly noticed about this hearing. I'm seeing a proper notice in the record. Is there any question as to the landlord not being given proper notice?
Not as far as we can see in the record.
Thank you. Any questions? Then Mr. Dainswood? And if you could state your name, your city of record, and let us know how you'd like to divide up your time.
My name is Ryan Danishrad. I'm a resident of the city of West Hollywood.
Okay. How would you like to divide your time?
I will take 4 minutes to provide our arguments and then save a minute for rebuttal,
Okay.
if that's okay with you guys.
Go ahead and start.
Before I do begin, if I may speak to the point of the improper notice. The owner, Curson One LLC, had a management company, Scott Properties. Scott Properties, because of its neglect.
Do you want to lean just a little bit closer to the microphone?
I'm
Thank
sorry.
you.
Ooh.
Or move it up towards you.
If
Yep.
I may.
There you go. Thank you.
So when Scott Properties was dismissed as the management company, a new company came in by the name of Chuck Eberly. The addresses provided and the notices provided were sent to Scott Properties. Scott Properties communicated to the Eberly company there was a hearing. The Eberly company, not understanding the complete process as to how these hearings go, came in representing the landlord. So they didn't get an opportunity to submit all the evidence which would go for their case. With that said, I would like to make a motion to bring forth new evidence if the commission would accept it.
We cannot hear new evidence, sir. We're an appellate body. We can only discuss what's already in the record. No new evidence is allowed.
Notwithstanding that, if that evidence could not have been discovered with proper due diligence.
We're not allowed, this appellate body is not allowed to consider any new evidence. Ms. Regan, can you perhaps clarify that for him?
Sure. As I mentioned before, if it's evidence that could have been submitted at the hearing itself, then it is considered new evidence that the commission cannot consider.
But we wouldn't know if it could or couldn't have been if we don't know the reason why. Is that correct? I mean, I think he's asking to make the argument why he couldn't present it to the hearing examiner.
Right, he's more than welcome to make the argument for presenting the new evidence without presenting the new evidence.
For the exact reason I was speaking for before, when the management company switched over, there was a miscommunication. The landlord contained the pieces of evidence that I would like to submit. I don't even know if I'm allowed to mention them or not with that response, but they did not get handed over to the Eberly company, which was the management company, which could have been presented here during the initial hearing.
Just want to remind you, the clock is still ticking, so your 4 minutes are running.
In that case, I will call the seller's agent of previous property to give brief testimony before I start speaking.
Sir, if
Excuse
you'll
me,
state-
Chair, should we make a decision first of all? I mean, I have questions about why we're in this situation before this continues. I mean,
I think let's finish hearing from them, and we can discuss that. Sir, do you want to state your name and your city of residence?
Yeah, my name is Sam Libero. I live in Westwood, not West Hollywood.
I would just caution the witness not to present any evidence that was not presented at the hearing, because the commission hasn't ruled on that.
I'm just going to explain my role in the scenario, and maybe will help. As a broker, what we first do initially when we list the property is we take a tour through the building with the owner and the manager to get an understanding of the amenities offered to the tenants, so we could present that to buyers, and make sure they understand what they're buying. When we did so, there was no mention of any storage facilities to.
I think
This is precisely, were you testifying at the hearing? Did you okay, this is the evidence that you are not allowed to present.
Okay.
I think there's a misunderstanding between what the chair is directing and what. So this testimony doesn't need to be heard at this time.
Got it.
But I don't think they understood that based upon the continuation.
I thought we made it very clear
I-
that the commission has not made a decision.
Correct.
About the procedure.
And that's what I'm
And so
asking about.
therefore, no new evidence can be
Correct.
heard at this time until the commission decides whether or not to hear it.
Correct. And I'm not saying I want to listen to this. I'm saying we should probably discuss whether.
Sure. If you
Before
want
this continues.
to deliberate the issue of whether it's appropriate to hear the new evidence, you can. What the former counsel gave the impression is that this person had something to offer other than new evidence. It sounds like that's not the case.
Yeah, I didn't understand it that way, but
Okay. Can I just make one point?
I don't know. Not at this point. I have a question for the council, if that's all right, as to why there was no mention in the hearing, why that you weren't unprepared or that there was no notice, all that. That argument in our file doesn't come up until recently. So why wasn't that argument made to the hearing examiner?
For the simple reason that the management company that made the appearance wasn't familiar with the process. They were literally called in last minute. And when they came in last minute, they didn't know what they're getting themselves into. They didn't know that by coming to the hearing, they were prejudicing their opportunity to give additional evidence at an appeal or at a later time.
Thank you.
Mr. O'Keefe, you have a question for counsel? Why don't you stay up at the podium?
So are we now going to deliberate whether or not we will accept the new evidence? Oh, are we now going to deliberate whether or not we'll accept this new evidence? Should we and can we procedurally do that?
Procedurally, Ms. Regan, how would we best proceed?
So you can. So the regulations state that new evidence cannot be heard unless it's demonstrated that without due diligence, this evidence could not have been presented at the hearing below. I know that's a lot of negatives. But so given that they're arguing that they want to be able to present new evidence and they're arguing some procedural flaw, the commission can deliberate about that and decide if it's appropriate to hear the new evidence at this time.
Well, maybe the statement that the council made, the management company could have testified, right? They could have, hypothetically speaking, they could have testify at the hearing and present the evidence, whatever they believe they could, but they choose not to do so.
No, it wasn't that they chose not to testify. It's that the previous management company was discharged. A new management company was put into place. They were informed of this hearing very, very late by the previous management company, who I should add was the one who received the notice. It wasn't to the owner, it was to the previous management company. So when they came in here, they didn't have the proper documents to present to the hearing officer.
So when you say very late, can you be specific? When you say very late, how late? Is it a day before or an hour before?
I would be
Or a
speculating.
week before?
I would be speculating if I gave you an answer. I don't have the exact time.
Because
I'd
I
also
don't
like
really
to-
feel comfortable reviewing any new evidence, to be honest with you, because we don't do that for other cases and for other parties, and we just heard the appeal before, and the gentleman could have presented something, but we didn't consider it. So
I'd also like to just
deliberating, or-
point out that the Eberly Company could have said this to the hearing examiner when they were at the hearing, and they did not. So I just want the commission to take that into consideration as well.
Ms. Regan, so as I believe we've had some hearings in the past where hearing examiners have let the record stay open. Oh,
Do we want the witnesses to sit down while you deliberate? I think at this time, if there are no other questions for the landlord, we'll deliberate about this issue. Okay.
so Ms. Regan, I think we've had some cases in the past, as you mentioned, this could have been raised to the hearing examiner, and in some cases they let the record stay open after for additional supplements. I think that of all the parties that we've had before us, management companies are ones that when they take on managing a property, the fact that they didn't look into the rules or know what they were doing in this respect, I don't think shows that with due diligence. In fact, it, to me, shows the absence of due diligence rather than that with due diligence they couldn't have presented it. So I would not hear the new evidence. No, I'm
No.
saying there wasn't. That's the problem.
But I would agree that I didn't hear any testimony that would give me the impression that there was a reason for them to be able to present evidence tonight. I just wanted to make sure that we had heard why it is that that evidence, they couldn't present the evidence at that time, or their claim. I don't find their claim valid or causing us to now listen to new evidence. So I'm fine with continuing on without the new evidence.
I would be in agreement if there was an issue of the property having changed ownership and the management companies having changed and the new management company getting the notice a little late. That would have been an appropriate time to bring it up at the hearing. We are the new management company. We only received notice at such and such a date. Can we move for continuance? That did not happen. They moved forward with the hearing. So I'm inclined not to hear any new evidence. And to,
I would agree. You've said everything. Mistakes and errors on behalf of any party are not reasons to, our laws here don't allow that. This is, from my understanding, contemplated when new evidence is discovered after the hearing. You opened a box and your lawyer said, "Oh, I didn't have this," sends it to you, 2 weeks after. Those are the instances where we would potentially consider that, but just errors and, unfortunately, sloppy business management isn't contemplated in our regulations, so I would not vote to accept new evidence either.
Commissioner Maggio, any comments?
Well, in 25 years here, we never have received or accepted new evidence. I guess you can, if the house burns down the day before, then that certainly would be allowed. I think it's unfortunate here because it is a technicality, and that kind of bothers me that we can't hear it. So I don't know. I feel torn about this.
Madam Secretary, was there any time remaining for the... Okay. So we're going to continue with the hearing. No new evidence will be presented. We have
One of the documents that you guys have is an estoppel certificate from the tenant that states, the purpose of it is to verify the terms of the lease if there's no lease agreement present at the time of the sale. It says on one of the items that there's a storage closet that he had as a space. Typically, the landlord gets to sign off, review this, and sign off before providing it to the buyer. That's what an estoppel certificate's for. I could tell you that the owner, the seller, was in a major car accident and was actually in a coma during the time of this transaction, the end of the transaction. He never reviewed this, never signed it. He would have had a chance to do that if he didn't get into an accident. That actually happened in West Hollywood, but he didn't have a chance to do that, so they assumed the purchase because they had to follow the contract, and therefore there was never time to verify if this was correct or not.
Commissioners, any questions at this time?
I do have one question. Was that the property buyer or seller that you said was in the car
The
accident?
seller's the one that's supposed to review this.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that's who was in the car accident?
Yes,
Great.
correct.
Thank you.
Commissioner O'Keefe?
Did you testify to that at the hearing?
I was not, I didn't know about the hearing. I was just asked about this afterwards.
Okay, so you know we can't consider that then because it's new evidence.
But this was, you
At
guys
your
had this.
Oral testimony about the man being in a car, the seller being in a car accident would be new evidence because it was not presented at the hearing, so we're not allowed to consider it.
All right. Thank you.
Introduction? No, I don't like that. Okay. So, Mr. Gossett, we have 5 minutes total.
Yes, my name is John Gossett, and I live in the city of West Hollywood. And I rented the apartment in 1991. I was furnished a key by the management company. I've been using the storage closet for up until last year, so about a little over 27 years. I did include that on the estoppel. And the new owners removed my belongings, put them in a vacant unit. I eventually got them back, but that's about all, really.
Okay. Commissioners, do you have questions? Can I ask, when they asked you to remove your belongings from the unit, what reason they gave you?
They were doing some repiping in the building, plumbing, and they actually were the ones that removed the items. But they were doing some repiping in the buildings, and they told me they needed to get into the storage closet to have access to the plumbing.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
So you were agreeable to that you could transfer this into a unit until,
Yes.
and then you expected to get back your storage
Yes,
unit.
they actually built a wall that divided the closet, so when you open up the door now, there's like a wall you can't even,
I don't understand. You mean some of the space has been taken away?
Yes, they built a wall, I guess, for eventually they're going to put a washer and dryer in there. But
And that took away from your space?
then at first I thought it was temporary when they moved my belongings out. But then I found out later it was not a temporary thing.
No, but the space you had originally for storage, they've divided that in half.
I think this is new evidence. That's not in the record, Mr. Commissioner.
Doesn't have
It's not
access to it.
relevant.
It's in the record. I mean, it shows in the pictures, but he just doesn't have access to it at all. Like, doesn't,
But that was what caused it, by dividing it.
Yeah,
removing it from
Yeah,
him.
removing it.
The plumbing is the reason that
Just to clarify, Mr. Gossett, when they told you about the plumbing work and that the storage will be taken away, as you mentioned, your understanding was it was a temporary for some time?
That's what I thought, because they just told me they needed to get in there. They said, can we move your belongings to a vacant? They were doing plumbing, well, that would be, I guess, new evidence too.
So they never told you specifically that, starting this date, you will have the storage back?
No, they just said they needed to get in there to do plumbing work, and we need to remove your belongings.
And nothing in writing? It was everything verbally?
So, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner O'Keefe?
I have no questions, thank you.
Other questions? Thank you, sir.
Is that all?
Mr. Dainswood, you have 1 minute rebuttal.
I'm sorry, there's no more time left.
Oh,
I
sorry.
thought we reserved
Thank you,
that.
sir. No. We begin commissioner comments. Commissioner Maggi, would you like to start?
Well, if you have a service for 27 years and suddenly you don't have it anymore, to me is a little odd. And this gentleman has had that for 27 years, this space, and he deserves to continue to have it. And if they do indeed take it away from him, then he has to be able to have a reduction of rent. But they need to give it back. This is his space.
Mr. Martz?
I would concur. I think it's very clear that a housing service was taken away here. The tenant was credible in his testimony. The hearing examiner found for the tenant. I don't think there's anything that was presented today that would overcome anything that the hearing examiner found. I think it's very clear that the hearing examiner is correct, so I would vote to uphold the hearing examiner's decision.
Commissioner O'Keefe?
I concur with my fellow commissioners. There's substantial evidence to support the hearing examiner's decision.
Thank you. Just want to say that when it comes to the reduction of services specifically for storage, obviously the RSO seriously takes this as a serious matter, because storage, just like as a parking space, it's a significant, it's an important service to the tenant under the rent stabilization ordinance in the city of West Hollywood. So the ordinance clearly protects the tenants from taking the storage away, or in this case, and obviously the tenant's credibility. There's no doubt in my mind that the service was provided, and the estoppel, which is the best evidence that is submitted by the tenant, and there is nothing on the record refuting the tenant's testimony or the tenant's evidence by the landlord. So therefore, based on this best evidence and the fact that the tenant had the exclusive use of the storage space since 1991, I have no reason not to support the staff's recommendation upholding the examiner's findings, and I believe that the conclusion was correct. Thank you.
I would agree with my fellow commissioners and with staff that it's open and obvious use. The key was supplied by the prior owner. That this new evidence, I can't comment on the estoppel certificate. I find very credible evidence. If there was any question about that prior to the close of escrow, that would have been the time to handle that. I find the tenant to be believable. I said it's an open and obvious user for well over 2 decades, and has been a removal of a housing service. And with that, I would entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to adopt resolution of the Rent Stabilization Commission, the City of West Hollywood, affirming hearing examiner's decision on D-4426, which is 1000 North Curson Avenue, apartment 11.
Second.
Just for clarification, that was resolution RSC 19-560, correct?
Yes.
Okay. We have a motion and second. Madam Secretary, can we have a vote?
Commissioner O'Keefe?
Aye.
Commissioner Kirkby?
Aye.
Commissioner Maggio?
Aye.
Commissioner Martz?
Aye.
Commissioner Topchian?
Aye.
Vice Chair Bergstein?
Aye. The motion passes. If either parties have any questions, feel free to speak to staff.
May we have a 2-minute recess, please?
Yes, we may. So we are on item 10, new business, a presentation from the Planning Department on the light rail extension.
Good evening. Good evening, Commissioners. My name is David Fenn, and this is Joanna Hankemer. We're actually in capital and special projects, but we are planners. This is Norm Emerson, our consultant. We're here to talk about the city's efforts to bring rail back to West Hollywood. Obviously, this isn't something that you'd normally hear in this forum, but the council directed us to reach out to all of the boards and commissions as we're reaching a pretty critical time in the project with Metro. There's an important board meeting coming up at the end of the year, and we're making the rounds to make everyone aware in advance of that. So the project that will bring rail to West Hollywood is the northern extension of the Crenshaw line, which is part of Metro's Measure M sales tax measure. It's a half-cent countywide sales tax that was passed in 2016. It'll generate $120 billion over 40 years and to expand bike, bus, and rail infrastructure. It's highlighted, the project that will bring rail to West Hollywood is highlighted in pink up there. That project is the northern extension of the Crenshaw line. And this is, I'm gonna go through a few slides here that Metro presented at community meetings in March. I'll go through them quickly. If you guys have questions, we can go back to them. So we'll just jump right into it. So the project's in this area, circled in black. It's extending the Crenshaw LAX line, which is currently under construction from LAX and the Green Line up to the Expo line in blue. This project will extend it north through Mid-City and West Hollywood to the Red Line at Hollywood and Highland. Hopefully connecting to the Purple Line in between, depending on the route. That connection would differ. So this line will connect 4 Metro rail lines and 5 of the top 10 busiest bus lines. It'll, as I just mentioned, it'll connect from the Expo line to the Red Line. Under Measure M, there's $2.24 billion for the project, but not until 2041. So the city is working to accelerate that timeline by up to 20 years so the construction could start, hopefully, to get the project done by 2028. We'll talk about some of the efforts the city is making to do that coming up. I'm going to skip that. Oh, wow. I had a version of this presentation where I took some of these slides out, and this is the wrong one. Okay, here we are again. So it's a light rail project. Light rail in LA comes in a variety of configurations. It can be aerial, above ground level. It can be at grade, at ground level. It can be underground. This project would be a combination of all of those, but largely underground in West Hollywood due to space constraints on Santa Monica Boulevard. The different alternatives vary on places apart from Santa Monica Boulevard in the configuration. This is just a slide illustrating the kind of area that the project will serve. It's extremely job dense, so the area served has more jobs than downtown San Diego, Sacramento, and San Jose combined, which speaks to the merits of the project. It would also serve Metro's 7 of Metro's 10 highest ridership bus lines, but despite that ridership, those buses are stuck in traffic, sometimes averaging 7 miles per hour. So obviously, rail that is separate from traffic is clearly needed. Another thing about this area is there's a number of zero-car households who would be well served by rail. These are the 5 alternatives that Metro was considering in March. We've heard that they will likely eliminate option E, which is Vermont, which would not come to West Hollywood, but the other 4 alternatives would. They are from west to east, San Vicente, La Cienega, Fairfax, and La Brea, and there could also potentially be a hybrid of some of those alternatives. But Metro will come back to the community in the fall, presenting kind of what they heard, their additional analysis, and their thinking as to which alternatives are likely to move forward. These are some of the differences among the alternatives in terms of travel time and distance, but the key thing on this slide is just the ridership. It's very high for all of the options, between 77 and over 90,000 riders a day, which is higher than any light rail line in the United States. Some of their goals. This was their schedule when they presented this presentation in March. They were in the middle of community outreach for their study, which was underway. Now we're moving to summer, the next box, where they're doing an evaluation of the comments that they received and additional technical analysis. And as I mentioned, they'll be back in the fall, coming out to the public for additional feedback. And then at the end of the year, it'll come for board consideration to move into environmental analysis. These are some of the basic questions they're asking the community at that time. We expect that there'll be more involved questions the next time around, and especially if we move into environmental impact report, the community will be asked to make more informed and more substantial comment. This is Metro's contact information. Okay, so this is not a new idea. The map on the right shows the former Pacific Electric streetcar lines, and the map on the left is the alternatives being considered. And as you can see, there's a lot of overlap along San Vicente and Santa Monica Boulevard. So why push for transit? So in West Hollywood, support for Metro's ballot measures R, J, and M is among the highest in the county, between 81 and 86%. There's livability and quality of life things, allowing people to age in place, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, economic development with connections to LAX, and then just establish city policy. All of those plans on the right, the general plan, the East Side Community Plan, the Bike and Bed Plan, they all anticipated transit and changes to make the city more transit accessible. Oh. Do you want to say that?
No, just make sure you're in the microphone.
Okay. So what has the city done so far? In 2015, the city initiated WHAM, the West Hollywood Advocates for Metro Rail, to organize local support. We also found that there were supporters as far away as the South Bay and the San Fernando Valley, and we organized the All on Board Coalition to organize those supporters. Following kind of the coalition building example that Santa Monica used for the Expo Line Phase 2, we started an unprecedented funding study to look at the capacity locally to raise money to make this happen sooner, looking at a number of measures such as value capture through an enhanced infrastructure financing district, bonding against the city's local return funding under Measure M, advertising revenue around stations, new ways, new legislative proposals that we can make in Sacramento and Washington, and of course looking for state or federal money or private public partnerships, and especially real estate-based public-private partnerships. We worked with Metro to get a commitment to get the project shovel-ready, so should new funding come available, once we are shovel-ready, we're ready to go and go for those funding options. We will be shovel-ready once an EIR is completed, and the board decision at the end of the year is to move into an EIR, so it's really a critical point for the project. We worked with Metro to get a pathway to accelerate projects included in the Measure M program, and we are following that program to the T. We are the only city that we know of that is doing that. We got Metro to start the feasibility study, which was completed last summer, and the advanced alternative screening study that they're working on now, which is basically intended to reduce the number of alternatives to a manageable number to move into the environmental at the end of the year. And we also worked with them to release an RFP to get a contract ready for an EIR should the board decide to move forward. So what is the city doing? We're working to accelerate the project by 20 years through the measures we just described. The main one is the funding study, which is looking at the capacity of those measures that I mentioned. We have a flyer about it that basically has this information that I think was in your packets. But some of the important things is it's not intended to delay other Measure M projects. It's based on Metro's policy. We're working with the County of LA and the City of Los Angeles to make sure that they can meet their funding obligations as well. And the target that we're looking for is raising over $500 million. So that funding study and Metro study that's underway, those two things are both expected to wrap up in the fall to line up a Metro board decision at the end of the year to move into an EIR next year if we're successful in proving that we can likely come up with the funding necessary and that Metro is successful in reducing the number of alternatives. So how can you get involved? We are having a series of transit tours for commissioners and councilors and stakeholders in the community that are interested to educate everyone on the types of infrastructure that is being proposed in West Hollywood, what works, what doesn't work, what we might want to emulate, what we might want to avoid or mitigate. Those are some tentative dates for those, but we'll obviously inform everyone if they change and when there's more details on them. Metro will have a series of meetings in the fall, going out into the community for feedback on the alternatives that they have so far, as well as what they're looking at eliminating and all of that. And we post updates regularly on weho.org/rail, and you can also follow WHAM on social media or sign up for updates at whamrail.com. And that's basically it. This is the contact information for Joanna and I, and we're here if you have questions, comments, anything about the project.
Sure.
So shovel-ready literally means when the project is approved, we got to start our digging, right?
Shovel-ready for Metro is a little different than like a construction project that you're probably used to. Shovel-ready really means getting the technical analysis done through an EIR. And then at that point, you're more at like preliminary engineering, which is about 30% of the design. So it's not ready to actually stick a shovel into the ground, but it is in the sense of funding. Federal funding considers that ready for funding. And that's really the target. It's a shovel-ready is the term that Metro uses for a project that is ready to, and sort of primed to receive funding from federal and state sources.
The second question I have, just for the record, I'm probably the only person in this room who has literally rode the streetcars up and down Santa Monica Boulevard. And I know all the causeways behind San Vicente, which went Norwich, and all the cars were parked in that 7 acres across the street, because I know my friends and I would always get kicked out of the yard. So to see this actually happen again like it used to will just never be. It's amazing. We had the most incredible transportation system in the world, and now we're trying to recreate it, which we cannot do, which seems to me it all has to be underground. And that's going to be interesting to see how we go about that, because it will create a lot of turmoil, a lot of streets blocked. I mean, it takes a long time to dig the ground. I think that's all I really have to say about it. Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I am surprised and I'm happy we have this here this evening.
Is it possible, because this is aired at home for people around the city to watch as well, can we go back a couple slides? And if we can go back, keep on going back. There's a couple slides I wanted to have you just explain a little bit more, if possible. Starting with the car traffic one. The number of, didn't you have one that had like a number of vehicles? Maybe not. Didn't you? I thought, I wrote in here a number of cars, but...
0 car households.
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of a gray one, like dark, is it? So can you tell us what this means? It kind of flew through that one.
Sure. So zero-car households are people that don't have access to a car to get around, so they really rely on transit. And this area where the buses are stuck in traffic going 7 miles per hour, they're extremely mobility constrained. So rail, which is typically separated from traffic, grade separated in this case almost entirely either above ground or below ground, can move at much higher speeds and get people where they need to go. So the areas that are more red on this map are areas that have more people that don't own a car or don't have access to a car, and therefore are more reliant on transit. So obviously the western part of West Hollywood is very light on that map. So there's a lot of people that have cars there, but as you move towards eastern West Hollywood, there's far more people who have less access to cars and would benefit more from transit that is, able to move free of traffic, whereas buses cannot.
And so is all the other white on this map, is that accurate that those are very low numbers, or so they have high number of vehicles, or are we only focusing on a certain part? Okay.
Yeah, it's only the study area.
Never mind. I don't want to ask that question.
It's actually a really interesting map when you look at this graph too, because as David mentioned, the study area is a very job-rich area. So when you talk about the number of people who don't have access to cars and are transit reliant with slow speeds getting to this many jobs, it starts to really tell the story of the extreme need.
The study that is, the study area that we're talking about is from Metro's feasibility study, which is where they analyzed these alternatives initially. So it's the area basically around these rail alternative routes. So it's West Hollywood, Mid-City, a little bit of the area around Crenshaw.
Mm-hmm. And then there's a slide on there where you talk about ridership. Can you go back to the ridership one? Because I think those are really impressive numbers. So this one kind of flew by. You did mention that these are high numbers. Can you kind of go through what the San Vicente is and La Cienega?
Sure. So the San Vicente has, in this analysis, was estimated at over 90,000 riders a day. For comparison, I believe the Expo line is 50 or 60,000, and that's 40, and the Blue line is around 50 or 60. So it's much higher than anything Metro's seen on a light rail line. It's actually higher than any heavy rail line in California. So there's nothing in the Metro system that comes close to this.
Just because I use the Hollywood and Highland as my main station, do you know what the ridership number is? That's got to be one of the busiest stations in Los Angeles.
I don't know the station.
The red line's about 80,000 daily riders.
Norm is saying that the red line, which goes through Hollywood and Highland, has about 80,000 riders.
This could exceed the red line.
Yes.
That station. That's pretty incredible.
One of the advantages is, one of the problems of the system right now is the lack of connectivity. This connects 4 of the existing rail lines, so it really not only will enhance the ridership on this line itself, but it really will serve as a major regional connectivity and enhance the ridership on 4 additional lines that Metro currently has under operation, including the red line.
That's really critical, actually. A lot of people look at this line as just a way of getting, how you get to the airport from the valley or something. You take the red line from the valley, and then you transfer and you go down to the airport. But actually, anyone riding the Expo line or the Purple line no longer has to transfer downtown with this line. It lets you can go up to the red line, you can go to West Hollywood, you can go to, there's all these local trips that are not getting captured by the system now that could be captured to the system this way. And a lot of travel time for people that are going, even places not on this line, could get a lot shorter by not having to go downtown to transfer.
On the San Vicente, does that mean it would start at San Vicente and Santa Monica, or up to Sunset and down?
So Sunset was previously considered. It was eliminated for a variety of reasons, including a fault line that makes it unsafe to build rail there.
Explain that all of them start.
Yeah. So all of the lines would originate at the Crenshaw line, which is under construction right now under Crenshaw Boulevard, at Exposition Boulevard where it meets the Expo line, and they would travel north on Crenshaw Boulevard until they hit San Vicente. At that point, the Vermont alternative, which we think will be eliminated, would continue on Crenshaw, but the others would all travel along San Vicente for different amounts of time. The difference really is how they approach Santa Monica Boulevard. So La Brea peels off of San Vicente earlier and goes straight up. Fairfax continues on San Vicente a little bit longer before it peels north. And then La Cienega peels off just for that last little bit. But all of them would travel along Santa Monica Boulevard for some stretch of time. But the amount of the city that's served varies significantly between them. So La Brea, there'd be one station right at Santa Monica and La Brea. If Fairfax is chosen, then there'd be, there'd probably be a station at Santa Monica and Fairfax, but then also a station at Santa Monica and La Brea. And then as you go west, you get more stations. So for example, San Vicente, you could have a station at the Division 7 site right here at Santa Monica and San Vicente, which is also a significant asset that we're looking at in our funding study, the potential to redevelop that site to partially fund the project.
And would this then extend through Beverly Hills to the ocean?
No.
It stops here.
So, no, it doesn't stop there. On this map here, you see the purple line there, right? The purple line is going through Beverly Hills. So this is to UCLA. The lines we're looking at here are the orange dashed lines. So they basically, they don't stop anywhere until they have stations along the line, but the line continues all the way up to the red line is where it terminates at Hollywood and Highland.
And if it did go west, it would be underground, right? Because all the right-of-ways, we do have a portion in Beverly Hills. Could that be taken by eminent domain or on land?
A couple of things. We've had a lot of discussion about interest in having the line underground in West Hollywood. And it's normal for all communities really to want that. It's the sort of least disruptive once it's running in a community. Because this area is so congested, the entire study area is so congested, it is valid to have grade separation at every single intersection. So Metro is studying the entire project as an underground project. They're also, where their starting point is usually looking at where is it feasible to have it not be underground, but actually aerial, because it requires a little bit more right-of-way, but it's much cheaper. It's more than half or less than half as expensive. And then if they have enough right-of-way and the intersections aren't so congested, then they prefer to do street running, because that is, again, less than half of the cost. And so the feasibility study, for example, that Metro put out was really based on the width of the right-of-way. So there's enough width in the right-of-way to have portions of it street running along San Vicente, and then you get to a point to where it narrows, and then the feasibility shows that you could, barring other technical details that they have not yet studied, do aerial, and then when you get to Santa Monica, it's just too narrow and too congested, you have to go underground. So that's the sort of, in the way, the cheapest way that Metro sees that you could build it would be in those three different profiles. However, they are studying the entire thing underground because of multiple reasons. One, because of the extreme congestion. But if the entire thing is underground, it would obviously be much more expensive a project.
One reason because I asked, because as you go further south on San Vicente going downtown east, there's still all that right-of-way that is in the middle. And I'm just curious if that was going to be used or considered to be used.
It's being considered to use for street running. It's just then a matter of, at every intersection, grade separating, and so that's a trick. I think they actually, in the feasibility study, they show it street running and then aerial and street running again and aerial. And then by the time it gets into West Hollywood, it dives down into underground.
As far as I understand, this project has been very well supported amongst various neighborhoods all along the route. Except recently I heard that the folks in that area where San Vicente is wide and has the old, just lots of space from the old right-of-way, that their single-family homeowners would like to see that underground. Is that, do we expect that opposition or that makes it very expensive in an area that we don't need it to be expensive in? What are your thoughts on that?
So the area that you're talking about, Metro, so we had a meeting outside of the Metro standard 4 meetings that was requested by some of the neighborhood groups in that area. And so Metro attended, we attended. And at that meeting, part of that discussion came up, and Metro staff stayed behind and talked to a lot of the residents, and some of the residents did feel that they wanted it underground or not there. Others actually felt that they were more concerned with the high speed of cars actually through that area, and we're really looking for ways that there could be traffic calming rather than just the acceleration of those continuation of those sort of highway-like widths of lanes. So Metro staff actually felt pretty encouraged that through continued dialogue with communities and really digging into what people's concerns are, rather than jumping to what they suggested, sort of preliminarily as the answer, that they can really weed out options. And that's really part of the process of what they're doing right now. Like this summer, they're going to have continued discussions with groups that are really interested and want to communicate and participate in helping Metro figure out the best alignments and profiles.
Thank you so much for your presentation and coming here and all your work to bring Metro Rail to the city of West Hollywood. I haven't owned a car since 2000, and I lived in New Orleans, then DC, and here, and this is the only place where people looked at me like I was crazy. So I think that's going to happen less and less as more people start shifting and there's more options. One question, you had mentioned not being stuck in that buses are stuck in traffic, and you're talking about it possibly being street grade on San Vicente. I've seen some complaints with the Expo line that an entire train of hundreds of people get stuck behind one car at an intersection. If that's going to happen, if it's going to be on the street, is this an issue?
So we should clarify, this line, because of how congested the area is actually, I think there's only one spot in the entire, of all the alignments, where you could have it actually cross another street at grade. Street running means that, like, in between intersections, it's at ground level. But in this case, every time you get to a cross street, you would elevate and go over that cross street.
So it would have its own lane. There would be no cars that it
Yes,
could ever
exactly.
be stuck behind.
So in San Vicente, the only stretch really where it could potentially be at ground level, that's that area where you have those wide grassy medians. So it would run in that median without interfering with cars, and then when it approaches a street, it would elevate up onto a bridge to go over the intersection and then go back down to street level on the other side.
Okay, good to hear. Thank you.
Let me add, because there was a lot of interest in the San Vicente and the street running, one of the things that's different about Measure M projects that was not the case for Measure R transportation projects is that Measure M is going to be considering not just the rail infrastructure, but the complementary important right-of-way projects, such as their active transportation first last mile projects. So wide sidewalks, more lighting for safety, bike lanes, landscaping. A lot of those projects we saw in the Expo line were, funded separately and built separately from the projects. In Measure M, during the EIR, there is a point in which the project is identified, not just the rail, but all these sort of ancillary projects. And it's really up to a community to advocate for what those ancillary projects are. Along San Vicente, there was some interest by City of LA residents and planners have been talking about, a jogging path, a running path, something similar to what is the condition of San Vicente in Santa Monica, but with a train also, and said that there are some concepts basically of widened landscape buffers between the train that also provide other facilities for pedestrians and bicyclists.
I just want to ask, obviously this project will face some sort of, there will be some people, some groups opposing what you're proposing. And I wonder what are the most valid concerns that the people who oppose are raising at this point? So what are the valid points?
I think some of the construction impacts that I think one of you alluded to, yes, you're tunneling, but there's still places where you're bringing dirt out of the ground and there's noise and there's dust and there's disruption to local businesses. But the good news on that front is Metro's gotten a lot better at construction impact mitigation. They have a whole fund now where they provide grants to local businesses. There's like complaint hotlines and kind of screening of construction sites with decorative fencing with project information and stuff like that. So I would say construction impacts are definitely a very serious concern that the city will take seriously. But it's one that is less of a problem with Metro's current paradigm than it was in the past.
And I'd have to say that the change to Metro, including these ancillary projects, these first last mile and these active transportation projects, is a response to what they did not do well in previous projects, and those were the valid, concerns that communities had. Like, why aren't you giving me a better streetscape? Why aren't you putting trees back at more the closer space together, or a bigger canopy? Why aren't you providing me enough light now that you are asking more people to be along this route? We need more light, and that was. And I think Metro really learned by that, by opening up this round of projects to include funding for those, and to identify them as part of the prime project.
Some other considerations that we're going to try to show to city officials during the transit tours that we're going to be conducting is whenever you have transition, so if you're transitioning from aerial to at grade or underground, that transition takes up a lot of physical space, and that space is not necessarily super activated. It's almost like a barrier between what's on either side of the train, more so than when the train is fully underground or fully elevated. That transition space can be very disruptive. So we're going to be looking at ways to mitigate the impact of those, to be careful about where that happens with this project. And that kind of approach is similar to some of the other things. So like, for example, station entrances, where you put a station entrance matters. Like if you have a station at Santa Monica and San Vicente, which of those four corners you have the escalators actually matters for how useful the line is to people. You know, in a busy spot like that, where you have occasionally gatherings of 500,000 people with Pride, maybe the city would like to advocate for more than one entrance at that site. So those are all kinds of things that we're going to be pointing out and looking at on the transit tours with city officials, to try to make sure that when rail does come to West Hollywood, it comes in a way that meets local needs.
And we hope to see you all there. You'll get invitations.
Mr. Marks, do you have any questions? I have two. Is there any potential for impact? I know it's either the city of Beverly Hills or the school district, one of the two continues to litigate to stop construction underneath the school. If they are unfortunately successful in that litigation, does that have any potential impact for the line that's being considered through West Hollywood?
The litigation specifically?
They're trying to stop the tunneling for the purple line.
My understanding is they've lost their lawsuit, that it's finally over after 20 years or something. But this project does graze the city of Beverly Hills if it's the San Vicente alignment, just the very edge of it.
Not by the high
so
school.
at some point they'll be involved. But the city has a very different opinion about the project than does the school district,
Yes.
so we don't think it'll be a problem.
And then second, I know that the city of West Hollywood has a very healthy financial reserve, but we don't have enough money to build a subway. What, if any, financial considerations is the city contemplating to further the process to get it to that shovel ready? I know.
So the funding study that we're performing is looking at the amount of money we could raise through a variety of mechanisms. One would be a local sales tax within the city of West Hollywood, to bring it up to the cap that other cities in the county have moved up to, like Santa Monica is, I think it's 1/4 cent higher than West Hollywood, so we could bring it up to that level and bond against that revenue for a lump sum that could be a down payment towards the train. Another strategy is an enhanced infrastructure financing district, which is a method of value capture where if you build a rail line through an area, the property values go up, and the amount of the increment, the increase in the property tax caused by that infrastructure, or from before to after, instead of going into the general fund, is redirected to a specific purpose, and you can bond against those revenues to get a lump sum in advance. That's not a new tax, that's just redirecting an increase in an existing tax to a specific purpose. EFIDs are difficult to create, and you have to get the city or the county on board, and it's a difficult process, but we're looking at it in conjunction with LA and the county and Metro. We're also looking at advertising revenue on the stations.
Before we move off the EIFD, we should talk a little bit about that may be of interest to this body here. In that, so once you create that district, it's difficult to do so, but if you do, you can be used not just as a funding mechanism, but as just sort of a decision body too. You can have different policies even within that zone. And so one of the ideas that has come out of a couple of the community meetings that we have been to are there policies along this corridor that we could create that allow for first right to return. There's certainly the issue of displacement and gentrification with a lot of these projects, transit projects, and that is some of the opposition that we've actually heard. We've heard people say, we're not anti-transit, we're not even anti-development, we're anti-displacement. And so the idea that you could actually have a body that could have different rules and that are related to the development in that area is something that certainly is a policy. You've got the avenue to create that right in this EIFD, and so that's something that we'd like to look into a little bit more.
And when you mentioned displacement, displacement from residential rent control units, and what would be a scenario or a possibility of such displacement?
So the displacement issue is is more of an issue will likely be more of an issue in LA than it will be in West Hollywood, but a lot of this line is in LA. And West Hollywood does have, the rent control and inclusionary housing requirements and things like that are much stricter than LA. And if there was an EFID that spans West Hollywood and LA, we might be able to pass protections in that portion of LA that might not pass citywide in LA. You could also have stricter requirements in West Hollywood than in the rest of the city, perhaps.
And it's really about the value of the property, the development value of the property, and the likelihood of property to turn over from whatever is existing housing to new housing. And in the process of creating new housing, the market rate of that housing displaces people who were living there previously. And so one of the policies that we were thinking about, is there a way to do a first right, to return, and also an inclusionary policy to a certain number of those units would have to be affordable, or market rate, workforce, other prices than just the market.
So it wouldn't be any eminent domain on the residential properties or anything. That's not a possibility. I hope.
No, the Metro doesn't. The property takes that Metro does are, I need 15 feet at the corner of your property at this intersection so I can make the train turn. It's really, or the cars that now need to turn. They don't take whole properties and displace people.
They buy it, right? There's
They
not
buy
much
it.
eminent
And
domain
they buy it.
happening anymore.
Can I go back, you mentioned the second funding mechanism would be bonding against the increase in, increase in property values. If this is too policy wonkish, you can stop me. But, because of Prop 13 as it exists now, property taxes don't go up until a property changes hands. So how do you bond against a property may or may not sell for X number of years?
So you make assumptions on the amount of turnover that's happening in the neighborhood and when you expect those turnovers to happen. We have a team of financial consultants that are a lot smarter than us in this area, but they make there's a lot of assumptions that they make about what's going to turn over when and to what, that informs basically a financial model of what the property tax revenue will be like over the next 20, 30, 40 years.
But if a property doesn't turn over, there is no increment.
Thank you.
One more question about, funding. So the ridership shows 90,000, 88,000, high numbers regardless of which one comes through. That seems like it would significantly benefit the entire system through Metro. So benefiting all lines, every line from one side of the county to the next side of the county that Metro stretches. So I see this, and are we advocating this in a way that this is a benefit to the entire community? Everyone benefits here. For whether you live in the valley, up in the valley in North Hollywood, and you want to get to the airport, this is going to get you there a lot faster than any other system that exists right now. And when the debate was happening, a couple of years ago to make sure this project got included in Measure M, Measure MR, whichever one it was, the newest one. There seemed to be like this battle between what the West Side already has and these lines that are very expensive that go through the Sepulveda Pass at I think starting at $8 billion or something, and the cost rise. How are we advocating that we shouldn't have to cover the cost, the entire cost, just because the line happens to be coming through our neighborhood, that this benefits the entire community and other people are going to be receive advantages of this as well?
Well, one, council directed us in 2015 to facilitate WHAM because there's so many people who wanted to get engaged in bringing rail to West Hollywood. And so that was West Hollywood Advocates for Metro Rail. But we also knew we needed to build partnerships throughout the region. And we see from the feasibility study that it certainly does optimize, mobility for people far beyond West Hollywood. And so because every time we talk to any person, regardless of how near or far they are to West Hollywood, once they learned about this project, they became an advocate of the project. And so we started all on board coalitions so that it gave a venue for people who are outside. So for example, when the Metro Board voted on next steps, we had people from the South Bay talk in support of the project, people from San Fernando Valley, Mid-City, everywhere in between, Inglewood, And that really impressed the board because of the regional support for this project. So yes, it does. And I think the point that you made is, not only is it good for the entire region, in a program that, you talk about $120 billion, that's a lot of money to build a program, but it's not enough to build all of the projects. So why wouldn't you build a project that not only serves more than any light rail in the country, but also leverages existing, built infrastructure, right? So it actually makes the existing infrastructure more used than it currently is. And so, for people who have gotten into the weeds of this project, we see the benefit well beyond certainly the area we're in, and much more cost effective than, for example, the Sepulveda project that you mentioned.
And I think that those kind of benefits will eventually help us when we look for state and federal funding. It's a good story to tell, the metrics of the project, who it's serving, the optimization of the system, and West Hollywood chipping in with money and looking and helping LA find a way to chip in with money, and then going to state and federal regulators and asking for funding that's going to help the whole region. It's a positive story that we can tell once we get there, but we have to get through an EIR first.
Further questions? Thank you very much for your presentation. That will move to item 10B, reorganization of the chair and vice chair. Commissioner Maggio did bring it to my attention tonight that the at-large appointments have not yet been done. Commissioner Kirby's and I have not yet been reappointed. More than likely, those reappointments will take place on Monday, but would Commission like to have the elections tonight or hold them over to a date in the future?
I think we should probably wait until it's official.
I can't hear you.
Oh, I think we should probably wait till after the appointments have been made.
Or at least until the entire commission is here. I'm fine with that.
I think since we're doing rotation, it's not like there's going to be a campaign here, so it'll just rotate like normally. If, for instance, the chair was not reappointed, then we would have to simply have an election again. So, but for all intent and purposes, he will be the chair and has been serving as the chair.
I'm fine with having elected the chair and vice chair tonight.
Fine with what?
Because as Commissioner Maggio said, we're rotating. So I'm pretty much in favor of doing it today.
And I will, are you opening
I don't know,
nominations?
do we need to make a motion if we're moving forward or not? I'm not.
Well, I'll nominate
If
you
you're,
if it's on the agenda.
if you open the nominations,
Then we'll open it for nominations.
I'd like to nominate Vice Chair Rob Bergstein.
Although
I
we,
would second that.
all right, now normally we've been told by legal counsel we don't have to second anymore, but I'm glad that Commissioner Martz has done that because I like it too, so.
And for the record, that's the person who's next on the rotation, right? This is consistent with the rotation? Wonderful.
All right, so we have to take a
Vote.
Commissioner O'Keefe.
Aye.
Commissioner Kirpies.
Aye.
Commissioner Maggio.
Aye.
Commissioner Martz.
Aye.
Commissioner Topchian.
Aye.
Vice Chair Bergstein.
Aye. Thank you very much. Open nominations for vice chair.
I would like to nominate Agassi Topchian for vice chair.
Well,
A second?
unnecessarily seconded, since we don't need it.
Do you accept
Yes.
nomination?
Yes.
Oh,
Have a roll call vote, please.
Commissioner O'Keefe.
Aye.
Commissioner Kirpies. Commissioner Maggio.
Aye.
Commissioner Martz.
Aye.
Commissioner Topchian.
Aye.
President.
Chair.
Chair. Vice Chair Bergstein.
Aye. Congratulations.
Two as well, thank you.
I'd like to say that this is the first time it has ever happened where the sitting chair has never been present when we elected a new chair, but that's historical stuff, that's all. Congratulations, Mr. Chairman.
Thank
I was missing the ceremonial passing of the gavel.
I do want to say that Commissioner Charity did, I mean, we've all done good jobs, and I think he did really an extraordinary job. I kind of felt like I was at he was an attorney at a business meeting for a corporation, just the way he ran the meetings so precisely. I mean, we all have our strengths, our weaknesses, our different characteristics, but I just truly appreciated the way he ran the meetings. Want to thank him for his service. Look forward to seeing him at our next meeting. With that, I don't see any public in the House or public slips, so no public speakers. Item 12, commission comments.
Just wanted to remind everyone that is it Commissioner or staff? Just going to make an announcement about tomorrow night. There's a Lights for Liberty event at the park here at 8 p.m., I believe, 8:30. It's for a nationwide protest/rally for the human rights violations that are occurring at our nation's border with refugees or with immigrants and those seeking asylum. Everyone's welcome to attend. Please bring your own flashlight or candle, not candle burning, but candle electric. But it'll be here at this park tomorrow night, I believe 8 p.m.
Candles, or we have to bring our own candles?
We're told to bring our own.
All right.
I'm sure there will be some extras.
Commissioner O'Keefe?
A couple things. First, I wanted to make sure everybody knew about Ciclavia, which is coming to the Hollywoods on, I think it's Sunday, August 18th from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. Santa Monica Boulevard will be shut down and for cars and open for biking and walking and all kinds of other good stuff, and there will be a bunch of hubs there. And then I also wanted to let folks know that I went to the Public Safety Commission meeting as our liaison, and they actually had a few questions. I don't know if I should ask them now or should wait until the staff report. Does it matter? Okay, I'll do so now. So let's see. Commissioner Troy Berger, this was about a specific person. There was someone who was living on the ground floor and was hoping to be able to have security installed because she was concerned. And I think she talked to you, Mr. Noonan, or somebody had, and they were hoping something could happen with that, but I'm not sure if anything has. Is the city able to assist with funding for security in those cases?
The RSO does allow for security installations and an increase in rent commensurate with that service. So there is an application form that the tenants or the landlord can file.
Okay, and to be clear, so the tenant would just pay the extra, and can she require the landlord to put it in, or do they just both have to agree on it?
It's an application, and they do have to agree.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Ruth Williams was concerned that some landlords aren't replacing smoke detector batteries inside of units. Is that the responsibility of the landlords to replace the batteries both inside and outside the units?
And we forwarded that to the communications office. So we'll see how that communication is going out. I believe that there's safety has flyers, so that's in process. This comment came in after the newsletters this summer have gone out. So any opportunity for us to add something to the newsletters, and they're pretty packed now, it would be in the winter. So.
Great. I gave Mr. Noonan a heads up about the 3 questions, but I wanted to publicly ask him too. So I asked a preliminary question there before the main one, which was she was hoping we could notify landlords of that obligation, but I just wanted to establish that it is in fact their obligation too. Is that correct, to replace the batteries and make sure the smoke alarms are operational?
It's not my area of expertise because it's in the compliance code, but I believe that that's the case. But it would be a code compliance item.
Oh, okay, thanks. And final one was that we were asked about proactive code compliance by Commissioner Laughlin, who said that there are some tenants in her building that are not comfortable asking for putting in complaints about issues, but she thought proactive code compliance would be helpful. So I know we've already moved that issue, and it's going to be hopefully going to the council, and so I'll update her on the next meeting because it was after public comment that she said that, but they are happy that we're doing that. And that's all for me.
So the smoke detectors, for me, it's a really great example of one thing that we crossed off a checklist if we had the routine inspections of all residential units in West Hollywood, as does Los Angeles and many other municipalities. We discussed that. We moved it forward from this commission. It's now in the hands of, there is a subcommittee consisting of the mayor and mayor pro tem. They determine whether they will take items of interest from boards and commissions and agendize them or not. A good example is the smoke-free housing, which is back on the agenda for this Monday's city council meeting, had to be approved by the mayor and mayor pro tem to become an agendized item for city council to consider. So I know I'll be speaking up the routine inspection again once we, I want to get through this first item. It's been 3 years in the making of the smoke-free housing, but bring it back to council's attention and see if the mayor and mayor pro tem are interested in having a staff presentation on the feasibility of routine inspections of all residential units in West Hollywood.
To mention to Karen that when I go out to commissions, I always make sure I bring the tools like the handbook and a variety of newsletters, which we have here. And I find those to be very helpful so that people aren't afraid, they actually know what to do, and then they come forth. It's always scary. People don't want to complain because they think there's going to be some sort of repercussions, I suppose, but it does happen.
Richard Martz, any comments? Okay. With that, we'll move on to item 13, staff comments.
So if you do, feel free to also give out the phone number if you don't have the guidebooks, or if you don't have maybe we have some, I think we have some business cards that I can give you if you want for the information coordinators. It's 323-848-6450. There's also a lot of information online. It's www.weho.org/rent. Has a lot of information. Your packet has the annual report for 2017-18 in it. That it's taken a little while, and you notice that it's 2 years rather than one, so it's a double year report. We are supposed to be doing these annually, but with staffing challenges, we just weren't able to get it out for 17, so we're caught up. You'll notice towards the back, I believe on page 18, there's a section on the commission. And I've heard some interest from commissioners in being part of writing that section. So perhaps this coming year, if the commission has interest in that, we can, you can share with staff at the study session what that interest would look like. And I don't have any other comments besides that. The next meeting, again, is going to be August 8th.
Okay, with that, I will adjourn tonight's meeting to our next regular meeting of the Rent Stabilization Commission, held on August 8th, 2019, 7 p.m. in the West Hollywood Park Public Meeting Room.